That's common.
His cousin. But that was she they got all that side.
That time.
And they sold it. And then
All right. We'll go ahead and get started with the history of Christmas part. Did anybody not get a packet that wants one? I don't want all the people who got one that didn't want one.
I did not.
There we go. So this may be more information than you want to know, but it's there and you can look at it later or whatever. I'm not expecting you to read along as we go. I have to say that a number of people told me they couldn't be here tonight and were upset that they were missing it and asking me to film it so we could put it on the website or whatever. And after about the sixth person said that to me, I thought, I think I've oversold this deal a little bit. Expecting some revelation here. But, anyway, it is an interesting story. We'll start off with Christmas. And obviously to begin with, you have to ask the question, when was Jesus born? Anybody know the answer to that?
The fall. Early fall.
Fall?
Spring.
Spring?
Definitely not the winter.
Not the winter? Nobody knows? Yeah, all those answers was as good as the other.
Tax time.
Do what?
He's born at tax time.
Okay, there you go. Certainly. There you go. But they gather them, we used to say that they gather them for the census so they could pay their annual taxes to Rome. So it was tax season. Tax season. Yeah, we don't know when. It's almost certainly not winter. And two reasons that we know that. One is the shepherds were in their fields.
About the only thing I know.
But also because the census typically would not have taken place in the winter. Because the winter in Judea can get very cold, but it also tends to be wet. Roads get bad. And to have a census during the winter wouldn't make sense. People wouldn't be able to travel to the places where they had to go. See, in that time for Rome, you had to travel to your ancestral home. It wasn't just taking a census of who's where right now. Is you were expected to get back to, so in Joseph's case, he was expected to get back to Bethlehem and say, here I am, and pay his taxes. Don't ask me why. I suspect it was just because everyone was so spread out and they didn't have a way of keeping up with who's who and who's paid it across these different areas. So you had to go to where you paid your taxes, not the other way around. So we don't know what time of year necessarily. There have been guesses from October to very specifically September 11th. You'll see here there's guesses of March. Some say sometime in the summer. Ultimately, we don't know, and I'm not sure that it matters. But we also don't know what year. We tend to think of AD, Anno Domini, in the year of the Lord. That okay, well, obviously he was born in AD 1. Now, unfortunately, that's not the case. That's one of the years that they're almost certain he was not born in. And so part of the reason why this is difficult, I told you all this in church a few weeks ago, I think, but the Roman system of dating things had to do with who was ruling where. And typically, you would give 2 or 3 examples of so-and-so was the emperor, this other person was the governor, this other person was, in the case of the Jewish people, the high priest. And between the 3 of those, hopefully you could narrow down what year they were talking about. But as I said, there was the further complication of being several different calendars. And what I mean by that is, if you said in the 15th year of the reign of Emperor Tiberius, as this says for Jesus, or for John when his ministry starts. Well, one group had that year at a certain spot. Another group said, well, actually Tiberius came to power before he was ever actually emperor, and so they started 3 years prior to the other calendar. You get what I'm saying? And there's 4 of these different calendars out there. So trying to even narrow down a year is not very clear either. But the best guess they think is around 3 AD. That's the most common guess. There are other guesses. from anything from 4 BC on up to 5 or 6, but somewhere around the year 3 is what most people guess. So, we don't know what year, we don't know what month, we don't know what day. So, that makes it a little difficult to celebrate, doesn't it? Yeah. Yeah. So, Christmas, first of all, wasn't celebrated in the early church. They didn't celebrate the nativity of the Lord. Now, there was Epiphany, which was a celebration of what? Anybody know?
Coming of the Holy Spirit?
No. That's a good guess. Pentecost. Nobody knows.
Wasn't going
This
to
is pitiful. We just have to start up.
Wise
No. There we go. The wise men came.
Oh,
How many wise men were there?
Three.
Again, trick question, we don't know. Read all the scriptural accounts, it just says wise men from the east came. They brought 3 presents, and so it's come to be kind of widely believed, as y'all just demonstrated, that there were 3 wise men.
President.
But nothing in scripture says there were 3. Nothing says there was more than 2, or there wasn't 30. We don't know. It just says wise men, magi. Magi specifically, we've translated that to wise men. That came about in the Middle Ages. But magi specifically meant like an astronomer. Okay? So this was a person who studied the stars. And they would have been, in order to study the stars, they would have been well educated in math and science. And people from the East at that time were certainly far ahead of the West in terms of math and science and things. But these were people who would have studied the stars particularly, but probably would have been very well educated in general. But these magi come, and so we celebrate that on January 6th. Now, again, we tend to think of those as happening right close together, but it didn't. It couldn't have. To travel from the east by that time was at least a many months long travel. Okay, so they did not show up like a few days after he was born, or at least that's what most people believe. We don't know. Maybe the star showed up earlier and they saw it and they got there in time. We don't know. Again, doesn't matter. Ultimately, it doesn't matter. But there are a lot of things that we've come to, for lack of a better term, assume about the Christmas story that really aren't supported in Scripture or history or anything else. So what I was saying was, in the early church, they did celebrate a little bit the nativity of Jesus, but they did it in conjunction with the Epiphany on January 6th. So there would be some talk of the birth of Jesus, but it was never celebrated as its own holiday, and it was certainly secondary to the Epiphany. Epiphany being epiphany in the biblical sense being light. It refers to light coming into the world. Okay, a revelation. All right. Okay, so we don't know what day, we don't know what year, we don't know what month, we don't know how many people came to visit. We don't know if it was a cave or a barn. Most people believe it would have likely been a cave. There's a lot we don't know.
I did watch something on the History Channel, and they were talking about the fact that the wise men were astrologers,
Okay.
and that they were trying to figure out about the star. They were already on a journey about the star.
Mm-hmm.
So that was what they were saying in this piece, but
Yeah.
that was...
Yeah. And like I said, there are conflicting ideas about did the star appear before, and so they were already there, and when the time came, did the star appear at his birth? We don't know. Most historic accounts tend to, when you look at Josephus and some of the other Roman historians, that tend to think that these guys came later on, just with the story of Herod and all of that. Because Herod kills all the kids under a certain age, but it's not like kill all the kids 3 weeks old. That's not how it works. It's believed that it was some time after. So they've come and they've given their gift. But we in the church didn't celebrate that, as I said, for a few hundred years. It wasn't till, anybody know what year? You may have read ahead here already. What year did we first celebrate Christmas that we know for sure on December 25th?
3:36, as you have it, right?
3:36. You can pretend like you knew that. Because 3:35, 3:30, somewhere in there. Yep.
Start for the day.
3:36, and that was in Rome. And shortly after that, in the Eastern Church,
Okay.
that date got adopted as well.
Well, they took a
So
long time.
we've got about 300 years between Jesus' death and when we see the church first officially celebrating on December 25th. Now, some of you have already read ahead, like I said. The most common belief of why that date got put when it did was that the Roman Church was trying to attract pagans, which we say pagan in a derogatory term now in our, and we associate a lot with. A pagan at that time was maybe we might say Muslim, and I'm not trying to compare the two, but I'm saying it was a religion. It was a group of people that thought a certain way, worshipped a certain way, did certain things that were different from Christianity. So it wasn't necessarily the derogatory term that we kind of associate it with sometimes now. But they're trying to attract these pagan worshipers. And one of the great holidays, festivals in the pagan religion was this Saturnalia. And it had to do with the winter solstice and all that. But Saturnalia was a wild party. I've read quite a few things about it, accounts. I put a few in here. What I said in here was it is a pagan holiday. I said Mardi Gras on steroids. December 25th was the last day of the Saturnalia festival. And so the church is trying to attract these pagans and welcome in, and actually does a great job of Christianizing these pagans and things. But one of the things that they said is, okay, you can keep having these certain festivals, one of which being the Saturnalia. But this festival, as I said, was raucous, to say the least. And well, if you look down here, I'll just read it to you. It said, Roman pagans first introduced the holiday of Saturnalia, a week-long period of lawlessness. During this period, Roman courts were closed and Roman law dictated that no one could be punished for damaging property or injuring people during this celebration. That's just the beginning. Hold on. The festival began when Roman authorities chose an enemy of the Roman Empire to represent the Lord of Misrule. Each Roman community selected a victim whom they forced to indulge in food and other physical pleasures throughout the week, and at the conclusion of the festival, in order to get rid of this force of darkness, they would murder this person.
Oh my gosh.
In a public display. Yeah.
This sounds like the
Yeah.
Hunger Games.
And during the week, this is just one piece of it. During the week in between, it says that this festival is marked by like extreme drunkenness, sexual promiscuity, rape, all kinds of things that shouldn't be going on. So the church at that point, I guess, is faced with the question: okay, if we're going to keep allowing this festival, then we can't condone it in its current state. So they began to make that last day of this the celebration of the birth of Christ, that this would somehow clean this whole deal up. That was the hope. The result was that Christmas was a success. People certainly enjoyed it, and many of the rites and rituals of Saturnalia kept right on going, right up through the Middle Ages, to the Reformation. Yeah, much of those things. Now, we don't want to characterize this as everybody, everywhere, for all those was acting this way, but. You ever wonder why we have gingerbread men at Christmas?
Yeah.
They're representing these people that are being murdered, that are offering. Here's this gingerbread, and that's why. And it's not just gingerbread, but still in Germanic countries and things, there are cookies that are made in the shapes of people. Some would be gingerbread men, some are much more lifelike. But this is a part of this history here. So it's, as I said to you earlier, it's pretty messy, in my opinion. It's pretty ugly. I don't know this for a fact, but I think, projecting my own hopes onto this situation, when the church adopted this date and tied it in with this festival, I think the hope was that Christmas would clean that up instead of being infected the other way around. But surprisingly enough, the desire to party was stronger than the desire to worship the Lord.
I got a question. I was doing a little reading on this, and it said something about the Christians also chose that time because it was a time of celebration, but Christians could do it kind of in secrecy. So were they being?
Well, by this point, by 336, the church wasn't being persecuted very much. But the time you get to really into the 300s, persecution wasn't really a major issue. This first, say, 200 years or a little less of the church is when they would have been scared to do things. But by this point, now they may have been celebrating Christmas at some other time or some other way, but by the time it was kind of well established as the 25th, yeah, it would have been perfectly legal. Because it was legalized long before it was made the religion of the empire. Okay. So you have that. Now, what that meant then, moving forward a little bit here, is by the Middle Ages, some parts of this kind of festival had died down. Some were actually revived by a couple of the popes. Well, it never says outright the murder of anybody, but certainly the having people eat real rich foods and making them run long distance through the street and watch them throw up and everybody laughing at them and so forth. And these would have been often Jewish people or people that were an enemy of the church for some reason. This would have been in the 1100s. Is when parts of this get revived. And so it's really not until the Reformation that this idea of what Christmas is about begins to change. Martin Luther is one who supported Christmas but said, look, we've got to do away with the parties and all that. Now there were a lot of reformers who said, no, we shouldn't be having anything to do with Christmas. This is a pagan holiday, and it shouldn't be happening. I think I put in here, it says that the Puritans, when they came to this country, made the celebration of Christmas illegal for a long time. For like 200 years, you would be fined and thrown in prison if you got caught celebrating Christmas. Now, people still did it. It didn't die out, but the Puritans and some other groups as well felt very strongly that this was rooted in paganism, and I think probably if you'd experienced Christmas as a kind of a wild version of Mardi Gras, you might be a little more inclined to say, well, yeah, I can see where they're coming from here. But so it had a very checkered history, even in this country, until really the 1800s. Okay? It was really until about the 1800s that it was, before it was, should we say, widely accepted. Now, it was accepted much earlier and much more thoroughly. I mentioned Martin Luther was a supporter of Christmas. In the Germanic countries and regions, it was much more supported. They had a stronger history there of things like Sinterklaas, which later becomes Santa Claus. In the Scandinavian effect there of Yule, they celebrated Yule, which was a pagan holiday. And we talk about Yule logs and Yuletide. The idea of cooking and giving certain foods comes from that Yule celebration, so that got incorporated into our idea of Christmas. So it was really, throughout the centuries, became a mishmash of different cultures, and then bringing, because many cultures had a celebration around the winter solstice. Okay, this was a time of year that a lot of people celebrated. Can you think why that might be? What's the number one reason why that makes sense?
Longer days.
Short day,
Short days.
long night.
Short days. You're not growing anything right then. Short days. All the harvest is up. There's nothing to do to get ready for spring. It's the time to cut loose. And that was true for many cultures over many kind of different regions and things. And so as these different cultures begin to come into the church, they don't want to give up some of their favorite celebrations and holidays and things, and some of the traditions that they have around that winter solstice, and so some of those things get brought in and incorporated. I mentioned Santa Claus. That was one that was incorporated from another religion, but this was someone who brought gifts and to children, and it's where we get Santa Claus from. Okay. So it was a mishmash of a lot of different things that really didn't come together to be anything like what you and I think of it till the late 1800s here in the U.S.
Wow.
Yeah. So and really from the 1930s on is when it came to look like what you and I know in terms of a lot of things. And we'll talk about that a little more in a minute. Do y'all have questions about Christmas and things? I've got a little bit here about Santa Claus too. Because that's a question some people ask me sometimes. Do y'all have any questions about Christmas?
No, but I do have a comment.
Yes.
It practically broke up my sister's marriage because the first Christmas they realized that his family opened presents the night before, and her family opened the Christmas morning, and they had a big over the Christmas presents. I just thought it was funny. Maybe other people
Did they make it? Did the marriage survive?
Yes, yeah.
You don't sound too sure.
They
though.
had married
Christmas time is still rough.
62 years, 63, something like that.
Okay.
It's longer than we have.
Well, good.
So, but I just thought it was a funny insight to
Yeah.
how
How
ritual.
ingrained? Yes.
Yeah.
Certainly. Certainly. Yes.
When did it become all the presents and all that, and not just a religious holiday?
Yeah, that's a great question. Everybody here, she asked, when did it become all about the presents and things, and more so than the religious holiday? That was an argument. You go back in church history to all the way to the Reformation. People were arguing about this gift giving and it being a part of it. So that argument has always been there. I would say the commercialism of it all is probably from the 1930s on, and that's, so we talk about Santa Claus is kind of it helps to illustrate that a lot. But I think that debate has always been a part of it.
Well, the wise man didn't help any by bringing 3 gifts.
There you go. They set a precedent there.
I mean, I'm just saying. Yeah, I'm just
no.
saying, they brought 3 gifts.
No,
so.
that's certainly, the idea of gift giving has been supported and referred
And
to
so
by
then the
that.
commercialism said, okay, let's just hook up on this and we'll just really make it real big.
Yeah, and so I think a lot of the rampant commercialism comes with the rampant spread of wealth and prosperity. I mean, the two are not television, advertising. Yeah, they're certainly not unrelated by any means. Yeah. Well, let's look at Santa Claus then. Santa Claus, St. Nicholas is